Welcome to Gleaning Mustard Seeds with Jerrie Barber. Mr. Barber is a preacher, a ventriloquist, a barefoot runner, and writes 2 blogs. When Jerrie communicates, he encourages people, try not to learn very much. Find a mustard seed. In the next few minutes, try not to learn very much. Look for something you can do to move a mountain, remove a stumbling block, or provide a stepping stone for yourself or someone else. And now, here's Jerrie with this week's mustard seed.
In episode 2, I related one of the most memorable conversations I've ever had in my life. If you haven't listened to that exchange between me and a lady one morning while I was running barefoot, I suggest you listen to it. This episode recalls one of the most shocking and shortest conversations I've had between Bible study and Sunday morning worship. It was Sunday, December 19, 1976 at 10:20 a.m. I just taught a Sunday school class. An elder gently asked me to step into the elder's office. When the door was closed, he said, "Brother Jerry, I think you ought to think about resigning today." What a shock! That had never entered my mind. And after a few words I don't remember, I walked into the auditorium, sang with the congregation, "Anywhere is Home," and after a prayer and another song or two, I preached, somewhat distracted by the conversation during the intermission. Since that day, I've always recommended firing preachers, if that's something that has to be done, on a Monday night. It gives 2 days for the preacher to recuperate before Wednesday night and 6 days before preaching the next Sunday. What could improve this and similar exchanges? 1. For the elder who asked me to resign, talk to the other elder before telling the preacher to resign. The other elder was nearly as surprised as I was when he heard it. One elder shouldn't take this action. 2. Think, is it critical to do this quickly? There are times when immediate action is necessary, but from my experience, there are very few times when it needs to be done this abruptly. There had been no false teaching. There were no sins to bring about this action. 3. Had the person or persons who suggested this action talked to the preacher being released? Years later, I learned the elder had visited a member on Saturday night. There were some people who were complaining and unhappy about some sermons that I'd preached. He asked this man what he thought would help some people to quit complaining and get happy. He said, "I think if Jerry would resign, find another place to preach, people would settle down." The man he asked told me years later with tears in his eyes he never meant for the elders to take this action. A good response from the elder to this man could have been, "You know Jerry and appreciate him. You've encouraged him since he's been here. Have you talked with him and shared your concerns about these issues?" 4, is there a skill that could be improved by study and practice? I once talked with a group of elders who were ready to release their preacher because his preaching was not interesting and he wasn't improving. He was good with people, but had never been trained as a preacher. They lived in a town where a school taught homiletics and other ministerial subjects. They encouraged him to take classes. When I was with them in a gospel meeting about 3 years later, everyone seemed happy and well adjusted and the preacher was still there. 5. Have you approached the preacher about his shortcomings and warned that corrective action must be taken to continue the relationship? Rarely should there be a dismissal that is a surprise. 6. Have you checked with other people and tried to explore how this action could be done with less shock and damage to the preacher his family, and the congregation. Shepherds need counselors who are mature, honest, reliable, and able to keep confidential information. Often before major surgery, it's good to get a second opinion. In the business world, there's a process leading up to termination. Discussions, training, warnings, written concerns, remedial action specified, deadline to make changes, or else. 7. Have you spent considerable time meditating on the golden rule and how you'd like to be treated if your roles were reversed? It's amazing what the golden rule can do to so many relationships. Jesus said, "Therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets." Matthew 7:12. In one interim congregation where I was talking with the elders who had asked the question, how do you fire somebody without surprising them? And I explained the steps we've just talked about: discussions, trainings, warnings, written concerns, remedial action, deadline to make changes, or else. I asked this question: how would you like it if your supervisor came in Monday morning with another person and boxes in hand, telling you this was your last day, clean out your office immediately? There had been no warnings, no one told you your work was not up to standard, no suggestions on what you needed to do to improve. Not one of the elders said, "Yeah, that's how I'd really want to be treated." Then think about that before you go in to this kind of surgery. As I said before, so say I now again, from my experience, the best day of the week to fire a preacher is Monday. This was one of the most painful and productive days in my life. That day I felt defeated and depressed. But 38 years later, I see it was an opportunity to change my attitude toward criticism, victimhood, differentiation, and personal choice, regardless of the circumstances. But I was not blameless. Next week, we'll discuss some of the rest of the story.
Thank you for listening to Gleaning Mustard Seeds with Jerrie Barber. If you found a mustard seed, send a text or email with a link to a friend. This podcast was brought to you by Braden Parsons Photography. From family photos to landscape photography and everything in between, Braden uses his passion for capturing meaningful moments to create art and embody memories that will be cherished for a lifetime. Whether you want photos for your family, an event, or even want to browse Braden's portfolio for prints you can buy as art for your home or office, go to bradenparsons.com to explore the creativity and inspiration that comes from Braden Parsons Photography. You can also contact Braden directly at bradencparsons@gmail.com to discuss how to turn your photography needs into your most adored keepsakes. There are links in the show notes to connect with Braden. Thank you for listening. Jerrie looks forward to next week as we continue to collect and plant mustard seeds.